Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Leading Generation Y. Really pleased to have you with us today. My name is Jo Soler and I'm one of the Senior Marketing Executives here at Ashridge. I'm joined in the studio today with Trudy West, and from our Dubai office we're joined by Alex Davda. Now we'll pass over to them in just a few minutes to give them, so they can give you an intro to themselves. But before that, I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces. So you'll see on the slide there that we're also joined today by my colleague Andy Copeland. Now he's going to be helping us with WebEx from a technical point of view. So if you do have any issues with the sound or WebEx today, please get in touch with him via the chat. Now you also notice on arrival we've muted your phone lines. Now that's due to volume of callers today, so we want to keep the sound quality as good as possible for you. However, we don't want that to deter you from getting in touch and letting us know your comments and your questions. So we'd really like you to do that via the chat, which you should be able to find on the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. So it's in that right-hand panel. If you can send all your messages to all participants, you write in the white box, click send, and that will come across to us. And I'll be keeping an eye on all of that throughout the session today and posing your questions to Trudy and to Alex. Okay, so just to let you know, we are recording today's session, and I will be sending you links to that recording and the supporting slides in the following days. Okay, before I pass over for introductions, thought it might be nice to find out a little bit about you. So I'm going to put up a poll on your screen. That again will come up on that right-hand column, just to find out sort of who you are and what brings you to today's session and what you're trying to look to get out of it. So the poll is there. You can just click the answers you want and press submit, and that will come across to us. So I'll leave that for a couple of minutes for you to do, and in the meantime I'll pass over. So Alex, can we come to you first to have an introduction today?
Hello everyone, good afternoon from Dubai. It's Alex Davda here. Just wanted to introduce myself to the group. So I'm a client director based in the Middle East, working with organisations across the Middle East in terms of their learning and development, focusing primarily on assessment work that we do here, as well as being involved in some of the delivery on some of our programs out here. I also lead our research activity in the Middle East and am a Generation Y myself. So this work that we've been doing around Generation Y has a special interest for me, and also we try and integrate it into our programs and our work in the Middle East because it's especially relevant to the GCC marketplace, as there's a lot of the younger generation working in organisations out here. So I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Trudy West. I'm not Generation Y. I'm actually late Generation X. So good morning from the UK. My current role, I'm a program director. So my major responsibility is design and delivery of programs. So I work with a range of clients, usually customized clients. So I work with oil and gas companies, technology companies, retail companies across the spectrum, largely focusing on the behavioural aspects of leadership, but also, who are we when we show up, what helps us and what gets in the way. That's fundamentally what I'm interested in. And I help people understand that better, and I help organisations understand that better. Just to give you a bit of background, my life before Ashridge, this is actually my second career. So my life before Ashridge was working in the city, and I was a financial futures broker. So I come to this with and I've also worked in the NHS, so I come at my work with quite a pragmatic so what, so that we can really help people think better about how to be better leaders.
Thank you very much. Okay, Andy, is it possible for us to see the results of the poll? Yeah, going to just be a couple of seconds and then we'll take a quick look. Looking like we've got quite a few L&D professionals and HR professionals, so that's great. Really welcome, really glad to have you with us today. And in terms of what people are looking for, looks like to have more of an understanding about Gen Y, and understanding how you can sort of change the way we work to learn, to lead. Gen Y and to further your knowledge generally. So that's really good for us to know, so we can bear that in mind as we move through the session today. So now I'm going to pass over to Alex, who's going to take us through the outcomes for today and the agenda and start us off. So over to you, Alex.
Okay, guys. So the whole aim of our webinar today is to provide some insights and thoughts from our research that we've been carrying out over a number of years. So you can use these general trends to make them personal to your own work situation. So to think about, how does Generation Y workforce have an impact in what you do in your organization? It will give you a chance to reflect on your own attitude, behaviors and values, and that of your colleagues. And consider the importance that Generation Y will be managers and leaders of the future, and our workforce today across the globe is both multicultural and multi-generational. And what do we have to take into account when we're doing this? We also want you to voice your thoughts. We want you to share things, either in the chat or when we ask you to, and also possibly if you want after the webinar via emails and conversations. We want to use this to provoke your own thinking around how can we, as individuals in organizations, understand and develop Generation Y. And if we are Generation Y, what do we need to do? And what do we need to do to take into account the other generations that we'll be working with? So we're going to look at the research that we've done over a number of years, and we've broken it down into a number of areas. We'll talk to you about the themes that have emerged from the research. Then we'll talk to you about the environment and the way of the world at the moment. It's different to how it was in the past. It's different to previous generations. And this difference and the connectivity of the world has had a significant impact on the expectations, the culture, the perceptions of our Generation Y workforce. We'll also talk about perceptions. So how do Generation Y, how do people in organizations like myself see themselves against the perceptions of others? So how are they seen by their managers, and how do they see themselves? How do they perceive their skills, their strengths, their characteristics? We'll also talk about their expectations. What do they want? What does an employee like myself want working in an organization in the Middle East from our work, from our employer, and most importantly from our manager? And what do our managers expect? And this difference is often what we find. Organizations that really embrace multi-generational working, embrace this difference. They allow managers and leaders to have these conversations. And culture. We'll talk about our work and our research around Generation Y as a culture amongst themselves. Clearly, there'll be slight differences across the globe, but the connectivity of the world today means that Generation Y are a connected and intertwined culture more so than previous generations. And throughout, we'll be asking you for your thoughts, questions, observations, and your feedback. So where does this come from? We do owe a lot of our work and what we're talking about today to the work of Karina Schofield and Sue Onra, two of our leading researchers who have done research into Generation Y since 2009. You can see a number of reports that we've done. And even like in 2012, a piece about Generation Y around the globe, looking at China to India to the Middle East. And a piece that I've been most heavily involved in is looking at Generation Y right here in the GCC. And I'll comment on that towards the end of our webinar. I think one of the reasons why we were so interested in the GCC, in the Gulf, in the Middle East, is because there is a burst of a young workforce here because of some of the nationalization policies. So we'll be using this research throughout our talk, as well as my own and Trudy's insights from working with organizations and getting your point of view throughout. So here is a bit of a breakdown into generation. you can see whether you're Generation Y, Generation X, or a baby boomer. You can see Generation Y tends to be defined as born after 1982. And one of the interesting things that I was talking to colleagues about recently is the fact that even within Generation Y, there's a difference. There's a difference between a 33-year-old and a 14-year-old. There's a difference even between a 20-year-old and a 30-year-old. So even in Generation Y, there'll be some differences. And I'm late Generation Y, and I can see some differences between myself and younger people in organisations today.
I think it's also worth pointing out that other research, it gets defined in different ways. This is how we've defined it because we had to draw lines somewhere. So this is how we are defining the generations.
Sure, and I guess organisations may perceive Generation Y in different ways as well. Let's talk about the environment first. I think to set the context, the world, as it says on the slide, is changing. You can see the difference between a Generation Y and a baby boomer. And I guess, unfortunately, for people like myself and Generation Y on the call, you can see the retirement age. We'll probably have to work a lot older. Retirement ages have changed. We'll probably have to work till possibly past 70, around 70. And we may want to, as well, work into an older age. The other key difference is that you can see a baby boomer would tend to work into their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, and use their later life to explore, okay? Possibly explore new careers, maybe move from one career in industry into a more portfolio-based career, traditional move between being based as a manager or a leader and then moving into maybe more consultancy or portfolio roles, and then retiring. The difference with Generation Y is graduates, younger generation, often want to spend their 20s exploring work and also exploring life. Lots of people travel, they take time out, there's lots of cases for sabbaticals and secondments in organisations and in different organisations. Study as well, so we know that Generation Y may work for a few years and then go back to other formal qualifications. So there's a difference there, both in terms of what Generation Y want and also the environment that they're creating from their approach to work. So I guess one of the interesting questions we want to first ask you as a group is why is the world of work different for Generation Y? What is it about the world that we live in today, in this moment, that may affect the way Generation Y see and work in organisations? So you can see in the bottom right of your screen, you can type question in the white box and send to all participants, and then you can share some responses to this point.
Okay, whilst everyone's writing in some of those answers, there is a question that's come in that says, do you think generations are nature or nurture? Will people in their 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s always behave the same regardless of the decade they were born? So I don't know, Alex or Trudy, if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can come to that. In a little while, we'll go through a little more about why it's different now for Generation Y. And we were just discussing before we came on the call about some developmental factors as well. So just the fact of the internet, everyone over the age of 18 has only ever known, below the age of 18 has only ever known the internet. People above the age of 35, I was just discussing, I can remember a time when only 2 of my friends had emails. This is a grown woman in a career. Only 2 of my friends had email addresses, and they would chat during the day, and we were all aghast. So what do you talk about on the email? Because we just didn't have it. That connected nature is something that's quite specific, which we have grown as someone who's not Gen Y. We have grown used to, but we haven't grown up with it. They've grown up with it. It just is part of what they do. And that makes a difference. It makes a real difference. But there are some aspects of this that, yes, there, I've talked about this quite a lot, that some people, well, I used to do that when I was that age, and there are some things that are generalizable across, but the specifics of Gen Y with some of the technology aspects are particular.
I agree, and it links to a lot of the points that people are sharing in the chat around ease of information transfer, more people in the world, easier to communicate across countries, cultures, different technologies, involved in decision-making early on, and access to information. So Monica's point about being involved in decision-making, I think that's quite important. I think the world is connected. People can share and improve and provide thoughts and feedback quite easily. Mm-hmm. And the global market, the market that we work in, I think we're connected to different parts of the world a lot more so than maybe baby boomers were, where they may have traveled to these places. Generation Y connected constantly to people in different parts of the world.
And I'm just reading a comment from Lorna about competence, not status. Absolutely, that really does, and we talk about that later. It's people trust people. They don't trust job titles necessarily. The job title is not the given. It is what you then do with your work that matters, which is actually true of lots of people. But Gen Y are much more able to think and do and act on that. Yeah,
I also think the world is also, for myself, in terms of being Generation Y, I'm much more conscious. I'm very aware of organisations that I work with and work for in terms of their social responsibility, their impact on the world, how they're behaving, how they're covered in the media. And I think that's quite consistent across Generation Y in terms of being very close to what an organisation does and their brand as well. Here's some interesting points that we've pulled up from our research. So social media, the connection of the world, the speed of information, I think someone mentioned, Googling it, so people looking up ideas. So the internet, I think someone mentioned this point, we can always get access of information from the internet. So knowledge isn't always power. Mm-hmm. There's also, as you said, voicing concerns is more acceptable. They want to be more involved in decision-making. They prefer less hierarchical organisation. Changes in work-life balance. We're quite aware from our research that they do want work-life balance. I want to have things outside of my life. I want to be doing different things. I want to have a chance to travel and see the world, for example. And that father-to-son continuity, Trudy, we spoke about this the other day, didn't we? In terms of actually, you were saying about the kind of minor mentality as well, or your parents did a particular job. So
the world is a good place. You don't have to take the role or the sort of career path that your father and your grandfather took. Only sort of 50, 60 years ago, that was, you followed in your father's footsteps, potentially. Now there's much less chance that you can go anywhere. You can do anything.
Yeah. And Monica's point about a different perspective to data privacy and confidentiality, they share a lot. They share, it's really true. I share a lot about my work and what I enjoy doing, what I don't enjoy doing, but also how I can share. I'm in Dubai, but I can talk to my friends who work and live in Australia quite easily. I'm very connected to people through different social networks. So.
I think to your point about brand is very important because Gen Y are so connected and true of any, we have potential to say what we think on any platform, and with that capacity to share better, we can people talk about work on their social network. So the brand of an organisation is also open for discussion.
Yeah, definitely. And you see here cases of organisations, people tweeting at organisations about something they're not happy with, even employees sharing things on Facebook about organisations and then their bosses finding out. I work with a group of senior leaders here in the Middle East, and when we ask them how they communicate, most of their communication is via WhatsApp now. They have WhatsApp groups, they share, they talk constantly, day and night, in WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm.
And LinkedIn. One of the interesting things I've noticed recently is that if people are unhappy in their current role, it doesn't take days of searching on jobs to find out the next opportunity. You can get on your phone, look on LinkedIn, click under jobs, and find lots of different things, which is interesting for employers, because it means that, I guess, Gen Y have this access not just to information, but opportunities at their fingertips.
Mm. So next we're going to talk about...
So I hand it to Trudy now.
Yeah, thank you. Perceptions of characteristics. So one of the things, so just to outline what we talk about, what we thought we were going to find in the literature and what we actually found in the research that we carried out, the characteristics that are shared regionally across Gen Y, and then some of the characteristics that are shared globally. We're also going to talk about the missing skills, the perceived missing skills, and also the perceptions of managers. So what role do managers take in a Gen Y life work cycle? But first of all, just have a little think about how would you describe Gen Y? And if you are Gen Y, how do you describe yourself, the perception of your characteristics? So just in one word, how do you describe Gen Y? If you could say something about that. Ambitious, jumpy, curious. I like these words, these are good. Fast moving, yeah. And I'm really interested to know whether you are Gen Y or if you're looking at Gen Y. Impatient, yes, we've found that in research. There's an impatience to move and can move, wanting to be in jobs because they want to be there, not because they need to be. That's a big part of Gen Y thinking. Very strong Gen Y. That's great. Confident. That's interesting about the confident one, because they look confident but often aren't as confident as we perceive them to be. So there's what feels confident to somebody watching, that's been able to talk up and speak up, but that can belie quite a lot of lack of confidence. If we can. So what we looked at the literature, both formal literature and also in the media, about what we expected to find. So some of the things that talked about in the media about how, pretty much as we've asked here, what do we think Gen Y are? And then when we actually did our own research, what we found was, yes, they are demanding, they're confident, optimistic and ambitious. But what we did find was that they were described as resilient. They weren't as resilient as we necessarily thought. Team player, actually not so much. Self-aware, risk-aware, not so much. And the bit in the middle that's, there are all sorts here. Good communicators, yes, some are very good communicators, some not. Short attention span, some do, some don't. Technical, some do, some don't. And multitasking, so there was a mixed bag. And of course, everybody are individuals. So we do know that some people, they're Gen Y, and they might be very resilient. There are going to be everybody represented at some level. So just to look at the local aspects. So these were, as we've done the sort of global research, everything here is represented across. So whilst there was a focus on technology in India, yes, there was some focus on technology in the other regions, but there were particular trends in India about focus on technology for Gen Y. Middle East and the GCC, so a multinational aspect of business and international education was found amongst the Gen Y. There was also a focus on desire to give back to society and the family. In China, there was perception of the cosseted. So one child produces an idea that Gen Y are cosseted, they are protected from the world. And in Malaysia, we found that they were loyal to their organisation and have a preference for international experience. And lastly, like UK and Europe, we found with Gen Y a perception of a lack of career direction, a preference for experimentation, and an orientation towards fun. And anecdotally, I've seen that with Gen Y. A company, a conference I was at recently, they were talking about employing people based on their sporting expertise, so whether they represented their county or their country, and then selecting them in based on that as one of their criteria, and then the organisation structure doesn't allow them the time to go and train, to be part of that team that was the very thing that got them in the organisation in the first place. So it's managing those kind of expectations when we want people to have sort of fun and life outside. How do we then manage that when we're actually working with people? Some of the shared global aspects of Gen Y that were fairly consistent across the world, a focus on self. And this may be a conflict, a peer orientation rather than hierarchy, and then a preference for strong work-life balance. So the peer orientation rather than hierarchy is exactly to the point of it is not about the job title. It is about whether you have the competence, whether you are like me, or, you know, I can respect you as a person rather than the job title. And again, anecdotally, I hear this a lot. They just don't necessarily listen. I'm the boss, and they don't listen to what I'm telling them. It's because they are looking to find the reason that they want to listen, rather than just because. Of course, you know, any leader, if you ultimately have control and you tell someone to jump, they will jump as long as it's in their contract. So just as a quick question, so what the implications of this within your organisation? What are some of the implications of this, of a Gen Y focus on self, on the or peer orientation rather than hierarchy, and particularly this preference for strong work-life balance? How does it play out for you within your organisation? And just an answer to Lorna, we didn't include Africa, not for any other reason than we went to participants and we didn't have a big enough sample in Africa. We did speak to people in Africa, but it didn't provide us with enough sample data to be able to really kind of collect together any significant findings.
But I think, Lorna, one of the areas, like we focused on the GCC for a particular reason, I think as we continue this research, I think Africa is an area we will be very, very, very keen on further exploring because it's so relevant. It's such a topical issue there.
We could be talking about a little bit more about the data that backs up the work-life balance, about some of the differences between Gen Y and their managers in terms of thinking about how that actually plays out day to day and the perceptions of that. So something we hear about the perception of missing skills. So what we found was that when we asked managers what do they perceive as the missing skills was interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, something around the leadership skills, and something that's called work experience. Now, when we actually dug into that a little bit more, it is very much the people skills, turning up, the sort of the real life experience rather than the technical. Gen Y think they're missing the technical skills. And, you know, if we ask that question, what skills does Gen Y bring to your organisation? You know, is it the technical skills or is it the people skills? So what do you see that are the added bonuses of bringing Gen Y to an organisation? But it's interesting, this missing skills, the leadership skills and the work experience, it really, so anecdotally, when I've spoken about this before and as part of design of programmes, etc., the work experience, being able to show up and be part of the team. So the team thing, when I go back a few slides, anecdotally, people will say, because through education, we are measured as individuals. Throughout our education, we're measured as individuals. Even when we do teamwork at school, it's still measured on the individual product. And somehow that doesn't, in broad terms, that hasn't necessarily transferred across to work. So people still see themselves as individuals rather than, you know, what do I do? What do I get out of this in terms of working as a team? Coming in.
Okay, just having a look.
There's a few interesting points about innovation. So Gen Y bringing innovation and creativity, sort of fun and activities to companies and valuing that. Google Docs. I think from what I've noticed about Generation Y in terms of innovation and creativity is, I think one of the most valuable things is when you see organizations that bring generations together. That's where often the most innovation takes place, where you have people coming from different perspectives and viewpoints to look at how to solve the same problem. And I think that's where the diversity of multi-generational working can really be valuable. But because often you have the Generation Y, younger workers like myself with lots of ideas, and then often you have, in terms of delivery, we overlook how do we deliver those things, and having experienced managers with us to sort of, not rein us in, but make sure manage our expectations is really important as well.
And then managers as mentors. I find this one, I love this piece of information. So Gen Y want their managers to be coaches and mentors. And managers think they act as coaches and mentors. But however, there's a mismatch in this. Can I move on one slide? Yeah. So if we look at this, this is how it's perceived in the research terms. So there is a mismatch. Managers want to be coaches and mentors. Gen Y want them to be coaches and mentors, but they don't feel they see that in their relationship necessarily. And I'm just wondering, how does that reflect in your organisation? So one of the things we found was there was a sort of a leapfrog. The mentors, the people who are managers are peers, effectively, become peers. So this is another anecdotal piece. The next layer up were the people they sort of gave the idea and the respect to. Actually, they're the ones that really I need to go to in terms of being my mentor. Do you have mentoring programs, and how do they get structured for you? And I'm just wondering about the quality of the support. So does this actually reflect their preference in terms of what they actually want as mentors?
Decent comment there. So it seems like Gen Y is constantly looking for a real grown-up or real grown-ups to sort of help them out, I guess. So they're always looking for someone to give them some sort of coaching or mentoring. Do you agree?
I was going to ask the three Gen Yers that are in the studio with me, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree fully.
Yeah,
I've thought about that. Yeah. I think about that myself. I always think throughout my sort of career, the last sort of 6 or 7 years of working, I've always had or looked for, sought someone as a mentor. And it's interesting that consistently, even when inside and outside of work, you're looking for experience and people not only to give you feedback, but to validate that what some of the stuff that you're doing is you're on the right track, you're in the right place. So I don't often want to know what they've learned and their experience. I just want to know what they think of how I'm doing, for example.
Yeah, that would reflect with me as well, I think, definitely.
And I suppose coupled with the openness to experience and having that trust, the credibility, the reliability, and the ability to talk to someone. And that's true across everyone. We want someone we can connect with, and we need it for our resilience. We need to connect with others. Gen Y have the capacity to go and find it. We all have the capacity to go and find it, but they want it. They're actively wanting it. Okay.
And the point...
Sorry, Alex, I interrupted you.
There's a point just from Jill about no formal mentoring. Informally, mentors come across all generations, and who is best to mentor. It's quite interesting because thinking about mentoring, it's often informal. I guess you often form a connection with someone, and they informally become your mentor, even though you may have a formal mentor set for you in the organisation. I think organisations that can encourage people to come together and create networks and both formal and informal mentoring works quite well. I know most of the best mentors that I've had recently haven't been formally given to me. They've been people that you've just connected with.
Okay, Alex, move on to expectations of work?
Sure. One of the interesting things, I guess, for me is the difference. So Gen Y tend to expect challenging and interesting work, fast promotion, public recognition, and colleagues as friends. That's both colleagues in their office, but across, they can connect with people across demographics and regions. But managers often expect their Gen Y employees to fit the culture, work hard and be team players. And sometimes it can be quite challenging. If you're coming into an organisation where you want interesting work and you want to move quickly, but your manager wants you to fit and do your time and earn your stripes, that's where sometimes you get some challenge, some resistance, and often some attrition where those misconceptions or misexpectations aren't always managed. There's many cases, friends of mine and people we work with, where really high potentials have moved on because they felt that they didn't have that opportunity to do the work they wanted to do, and they couldn't see where they were going. You can see retention. Gen Y tend to stay in jobs for an average 2 years. It's not a long period of time. We hear people talking and they say, I've had 2 years work experience somewhere. And I guess the younger the generation you are, the more you feel that 2 years is a long time. Whereas when we talk to baby boomers, people that are longer into their career, 2 years isn't seen as anything.
No. And one of the things that often comes up is it's a chicken and egg. Do you give someone the responsibility and then let them prove themselves, or do you have to have some kind of proof that they're capable before you then give them the more challenging work? And that is a conversation. That is a conscious conversation about which way. How do you develop that capability to be able to have the autonomy to do the more challenging and interesting work? How do you know when they're ready? And the perceptions about what is it going to take for me to be able to jump to do that stuff. And it is a chicken and egg situation, but a good conversation will get to the heart of it. But often we don't have those conversations. We have an assumption, a preconceived idea of what you need to do to be able to stretch yourself into challenging work.
Interestingly, there's a difference we hear both sort of through the data, but also through conversations and quotes in terms of expectations. Joe, I don't know if you want to flick through those ones. Yeah. So interestingly, you can see up on the screen some of the views of maybe a Generation Y of their difference in expectations, and compared to in the purple a sort of older manager. So he has no life other than work and spends all his evenings and weekends in the office. I'm giving it a lot of energy, doing all that I can to advance. I'm settled and progressive. They are eager and responsive. And I think there's so much value in these differences. I think these differences are really powerful if they're harnessed effectively. If managers and leaders can come together with their Generation Y employees and understand those differences. It may be the case that you see the Generation Y much more happy to spend some time at home doing a bit of work, or on their laptop in a coffee shop, whereas the baby boomer may feel more comfortable coming into the office to do that piece of work. So often it's stereotypes and misconceptions, but there's value of bringing people together to have those types of conversations. We've got a nice poll for you guys. Andy's going to put a poll up on the right-hand side of the screen again. We want to ask between Generation Y and their managers. I think that's a slightly different poll you put up there. There we go. Who is more likely to, first of all, do work tasks during home time? Secondly, be more likely to be switched on to work when at home? And thirdly, more likely to do personal tasks during work time? So whether Gen Y or their managers are more likely to. So just tick in those boxes. Let us know your thoughts.
Okay, while everyone's doing that, is there any other comments we think we can talk through? I know there's been quite a lot going on about mentoring and should we be doing reverse mentoring? So is there stuff that other generations can learn from Gen Y? I don't know your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So the companies that I've worked with that have used this find it very worthwhile. It takes self-determination of the people involved. So being told that you're going to be reverse mentored doesn't work because nobody likes to do stuff they hadn't wanted to do. But when it's done with a sort of open heart very much. You can learn an awful lot about just even, you know, I was in a airport lounge the other day, and I could see this relationship between a very senior manager and a junior manager, and sort of, you could just tell by their body language what was going on. And one was giving, you know, lots of advice and was chatting, and then suddenly he got his laptop out and didn't know how to work the laptop, and suddenly was like, oh, could you do that? And they then had this very relaxed conversation while one was working with the laptop, and it just completely changed the dynamics of. So suddenly one didn't have all the power. There was a balance, and then they had a much more open. I wasn't listening to the conversation, I hasten to add, but just watching the body language of how they were together, it levels the playing field, and it reduces the power differential between the boss and the staff, because ultimately, you know, a reduced power differential in a system is always going to be better than a unless, you know, the house is on fire, in which case you need someone to be able to say, go and do. But during sort of creativity and innovation, having a reduced power differential, that can work through reverse mentoring very well, because it opens your eyes to actually what's going on in other parts of the organisation with younger, different generations.
Okay, thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
If we can go back, maybe, Alex, to the poll results. I know someone
Sure.
on the chat has also asked a question about we're assuming that Gen Y might not be the manager in this situation. I don't know how you want to...
Yeah, I answered that in the chat, really. I think from the data, so I completely appreciate the point, and it's more the word. Managers obviously can be Generation Y. I heard a lovely talk recently from a Generation Y leader in eBay. So obviously that's the case. But for our sample, the work that we've done, is that the managers were people that were managing Generation Y and weren't Generation Y themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's just a wording. You could put non-Generation Y, for example. So if we go back to the poll, just have a look at that. Can we get that up? Yeah, interesting. It's really interesting there, how we can see that managers are seen to possibly to do more work tasks during home time, and so personal tasks during work time would see Generation Y. I completely agree with that perception. But interestingly, there's a bit of a balance between switched on when at home. I'm wondering if all the Generation Y in our group have said, yeah, they're more likely to be switched on at home. And all the managers within our webinar said, yeah, they're all more likely to. It's interesting. We've got such a split there. Trudy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've talked about this before. There's something, you know, being switched on. Ultimately, it's about, you know, how we manage the tasks that we do and how we manage our time to do that. I worked with a group recently where the whole organisation was set up to manage work-life balance, was specifically as one of the core values was that it was results and task focused rather than time focused. And so when you worked, how you worked, and still managed to feel when someone came in at 10:30, even though he'd been there since 8:30, a gut reaction to where are you? And then when they log on and they start looking at stuff on Facebook, you know, this kind of feeling. Even as a primary principle of his organisation, he still felt this feeling of injustice somehow, and it's a cognitive effort to see the difference between the two. But ultimately, managing work-life balance is critical, and as long as it is actually in balance, not just doing more outside.
Yeah, and I agree. Thinking about my own perception, like. I think that generationally, there's, in terms of work-life balance, so for example, for myself, I can work longer hours, I can work at the weekends, I don't have family commitments or children, so there is that opportunity there for me, so I can do work tasks all the time. Equally, I know some Generation Y friends and colleagues of mine have quite strict sort of work-life balance rules. And the same with the older generation. Some people have more experienced managers will spend more time in work. Equally, lots have made real clear decisions to themselves about cut-off and when they'll leave and what they'll do and what they won't. So I don't know if it's more of a generational thing and more of a personal thing as well.
I think it's a personal thing.
Yeah. So here's some of the data that we've pulled. you can see that, I think, in line with the poll, managers or non-Generation Y, managers of Generation Y, more likely to do work tasks during home time. Switched on, so more likely to be switched on. And I guess the poll was in agreement that often personal tasks during work time, Gen Y are probably more likely to do that, which is really, really interesting. So it validates our data from your point of view as well. So.
So as long as it truly is in balance, that's the key.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Okay, so there's been a few comments along the side about the impact of culture, and culture does matter. You know, it does make a difference. Both sort of organisational culture and global culture will make different threads and different lines into what you find and what you experience. But what we did find was that Gen Y were more similar around the world than their managers are. Now, the socialisation process that we've talked about before, we don't know why this is specifically because we haven't specifically measured it, but we do know they are more similar around the world than their managers. And multicultural societies, this is our assumption, this is some of the things that might explain it. The multicultural societies' rapid international communication and access to education abroad provides new viewpoints or similar viewpoints. You know, the other way of looking at it is actually we've got a more heterogeneous group of people that are managers. But what does this mean for us as a multi-generational, multinational workforce? I've worked with groups of people recently that are largely expat, as Alex is. That's a different type of person that's going to leave their family. We do know that Gen Y are quite attached to family as such. So when they are choosing to leave their family to work as an expat in a community outside, what does that actually mean in terms of them? Are they similar in terms of what they expect? We would argue yes, they are. So recruiting for culture that you are working with being mindful of not creating clones. You know, you don't want everybody to be the same. You do still need to keep the diversity. But bringing people, just be mindful of employing people based on the qualifications or the schools that they went to, the stripes on their arms rather than their ethic, their work ethic as a priority, because it's easy to sift people in based on their university or their results, exam results. But then what we found longitudinally in other research is that doesn't necessarily lead to fit. It just means you've got people with the right bit of paper. Ultimately, employing to fit culture and a strong work ethic and being able to demonstrate that. So as an organisation, you need to really test assumptions about, are you attractive for a Gen Y workforce? And also the existing managers, are they prepared and motivated to lead and develop a Gen Y workforce? Now that obviously goes two ways. How do we prepare Gen Y to be open to different ways of working that doesn't represent necessarily how they've been to school, for example, tick, tick, tick in terms of exam qualifications. This is going to take a much more broader approach, much more judgment, much more ambiguity. How do we manage the two together? It's ultimately about good conversations. The other thing
sorry.
Okay, Alex.
I was just saying, just back to that point, it's like one of the things I've noticed from working with managers in organisations here is developing a coaching style of leadership. We say to managers that they're working with anyone, they need to develop a coaching style. But that requires real time, practice, and often is unnatural for certain people, something they haven't done before. They're used to a particular management style, and that works for them, and it delivers results. So we have to be aware in organisations that if we want managers to lead and develop Generation Y through a different leadership style, we also have to invest in those managers and develop their own skill set, their own confidence, and their motivation to do so.
Thank you. We asked a simple question about if managers could change one thing and if graduates could change one thing. And obviously there was not one thing that they all came up with, because that would make life so much easier because we'd all be changing that one thing. So what we found, some improving the processes to match Gen Y in the organisation. So to the last point, are we actually matching people, or are we matching skill sets? Because skill sets can be learnt. The people and integration, it boils down to people. There's something about the career progression, because people leave. They're not wedded to an organisation as they may have been 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They can go. There's more portfolio careers. They're not wedded to an organisation. They're wedded to their career progression. If they're not getting it, they can leave. Now, I've worked with some organisations that use that, and they use their 2-year window to get the most out of their 2-year, knowing full well they're going to leave at the end of it. Others move them around in such a way so that they retain that knowledge, retain the skills that they've developed in the group, in their Gen Ys. And effectively, it's like they're leaving and changing different organisations, but they're just moving quicker to have more challenge. And something about the recruitment selection. So, how do you select in the right people? So we should employ Gen Y via temporary work placements so that both parties can trial the cultural fit. Now, that argument will certainly benefit an organisation. Is that something that's going to benefit a Gen Y? Let's ask. Let's find out. We also asked Gen Y and graduates what if they could change one thing. So if we go forwards one. And again, if there were one thing, we would be doing it, but of course, we're all people, so we have differences. Career progression, salary, more salary, yes, we'd all like that. But the bottom line is salary plateaus out. We just need to earn enough so we don't have to worry about it. Manager behaviour, so that's a mismatch in perception about what you're expecting and what you got. Resource management and communication, and this delegation of trust, to be delegated to and have trust. That, again, back to that point, is a chicken and egg. Give me more responsibility, teach me new things. You could argue, teach me new things and then give me responsibility. That is a circular argument. Where are we now? Alex, over to you.
Alex, I'm conscious of the time. It's moving very swiftly, so if we can maybe just, I want to make sure we have got some time for questions at the end, so if you can run through this fairly.
Sure, just give me 2 minutes on this. The reason why we looked into Generation Y here in the GCC, so in the Gulf, I'm based in the UAE, was because of the nationalisation agendas of many of the governments in the region and the young workforce. So I think the average age of the workforce, I think in the UAE, is around 24, 25, a very young workforce, okay? So Generation Y is bursting. It's a high demographic bulge of younger people in organisations. And also, here is quite a traditional culture. But what we found is that they are still, although they respect power and they respect, like Emma's question around China, they respect power distance, there is a traditional structure, traditional hierarchy. There are still some consistent trends with Generation Y here and in all across the globe, and there's some differences. So, for example, pressure comes from themselves. It's strong. It's the same across other cultures. Work-life balance is important. And they do view older colleagues as important, and they see that they can help them through technology. One thing that we've noticed from our research here in the GCC is that they especially value qualifications. And I think this goes back to the traditional kind of cultural aspects and the value placed on education here. But equally, they want to develop leadership skills. Like Global Generation Y, they want a visionary democratic leadership style. Even though they see commanding leadership, they are more likely to speak their mind. And females in the GCC are even wanting their managers to change their style more. One thing that I guess I've noticed about working here, which is really, really important, is the balance, the way that Generation Y here balance the traditional culture, the lifestyle, some of the societal, the family norms. They're really driven by giving back to their family, their society, that type of aspect. And they also harness some of the modern opportunities they have to be connected, to study in different parts of the world, to learn from colleagues, to have friends in different places, to do formal qualification, but also have the opportunity to develop their leadership style. So I think Generation Y, especially here, and I think probably anecdotally in other cultures, like Emma mentioned China, are able to both straddle the culture of being a Generation Y, but also within their own regional culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that brings us on to questions, and I mean, I think we've had a really rich conversation. There's been some really good things coming in on the chat, and we've probably only got time for 1 or 2 questions, so if you want to type those in and we'll go through them. Anything we don't get to respond to today on the webinar itself, we will try and get back to you personally in the follow-up. Whilst you type in those questions, something I did think was quite interesting that came in on the chat a little bit earlier was about, do we think that Gen Y take on characteristics of other generations once they become into a leadership role? So I don't know your thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's it's what gets rewarded. You know, so if you see things around you being rewarded, it's very tempting to be drawn to those behaviours because you think, well, it worked for them there. I'll try it and see if it works for me here. And you know, that's up to the organisational culture and the leadership in the culture to actually test the assumptions about, is that behaviour what we really want? Is that really getting the best from us as an organisation that's going to move us forward, or does it just keep us where we are because it's worked so far, so why not carry on? And, you know, it's not always easy for people to challenge those assumptions. So having some bravery, brave voices, you know, to challenge the assumptions about, well, why do we do it like that? And how does it work, and why, and some of the processes as well that end up feeding into the behaviours.
Okay, thank you. Any final questions coming in? I know I've seen something very interesting. Okay. Lisa's saying, I feel that it's difficult for Gen Y to become loyal to the employer as no one expects us to stay long anyway.
Yeah. I think it has to be a conscious choice of the organisation to decide what they're going to do about that, and to make it transparent. You know, there's something about transparency. We can, if there is this sort of under the, you know, we know when something's being thought about, but we never talked about transparently. If it is an assumption that people are going to leave after 2 years, let's be explicit about it. Ask people. Well, you know, you might not know what you want to do, but you might keep your options open. It goes back to the point, if I don't need to be here, I want to be here. What makes me want to be here? It's this, this, and this. If I'm not getting this, this, and this, well, then I can go.
And I guess
development.
You go, Alex.
So development is really fundamental, and I think organisations can also appreciate that in some cases, if they build loyalty with a Generation Y, so a younger worker who may move on to another organisation for a couple of years to build some experience elsewhere. If they build loyalty in those first couple of years with them and they value that organisation, that person has still got a long time in their career to come back and maybe spend a bigger period of time to make more of an impact where they've gained experience elsewhere. So often it's about whether they can use those 2 years to create the best impression out of that person. That person really values that organisation. So maybe they move on to get some more experience and exposure to do something slightly different in a different part of the world. But that organisation and that culture is still in their mind. And they are willing to come back, and maybe come back when they're more settled and more prepared to spend 5 or 10 years there.
Okay, and as a last question, I think this one's quite an interesting one. In a company with a clash of generations, what would you recommend should be done to assist the generations to collaborate more effectively?
I think it's about balancing the culture, so it's not focusing on one generation as more than another. It's creating a platform for people to come together to look at the similarities, which are great. You know, there's a vast amount of similarities here. We've looked at the specific differences, but there's already a big overlap of similarities because we're people, and then we have a lot of things in common. And then you look at the stuff that's specific around the generations that actually are going to create differences in terms of expectations, everything we've talked about. It's creating platforms for people to actually understand explicitly the differences and where we might trip each other up, and where absolutely we can help each other develop, and the organisation.
Sure.
Alex, what would you say?
I would also say that, like, we're doing this webinar in terms of help and some characteristics about Generation Y. I think one of the other key things I noticed is the collaboration is both sides. So how does a Generation Y younger workers also understand what's expected of them and what's come from the baby boomers who may be managing them, or another generation. So collaboration is obviously two-way to understand expectations on both sides, differences in perceptions, and having conversations about how we can harness that diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think as we've only got a few minutes left, we are going to have to wrap up now. We'd like to thank everyone for all their contributions. I think it's been a really rich conversation. As I say, we will follow up with you. We will be sending you the link to the recording and to the slides. Before you leave, we would really love it if you could give us some feedback on our webinar. We'd like to make sure we keep improving. So before you go, you can do that. That's come up on your screen there, so that should be available for you. And then the only other thing to say is thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much to Alex and to Trudy and to Andy here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So, yeah, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's a great conversation piece. If nothing else, you could go back and actually test some assumptions about how you're working, both either as Gen Y or not Gen Y. There's some good assumptions to be testing here and asking questions of yourself and others.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time and listening, and the chat was great. Everyone sharing some thoughts in the chat was brilliant. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.